It's 6:38. You're listening to Breakfast Business. We're joined now by Paul Delahunty, Chief Security Officer at StryveSecure.com, the Carlow-based cybersecurity company. Paul, thanks for joining us. We all know why cybersecurity is so front of mind with everybody at the moment, with the HSE's significant challenges. The publicly quoted company Arda confirming last night that it's had a cybersecurity incident as well. I suppose large companies, large organisations feel particularly threatened, but SMEs are also perhaps concerned now that they have the right security measures in place. We also know that the biggest way in for people is through their human employees making some mistake or other. But are there software programs out there that you and others can provide that will use artificial intelligence to bolster those defences?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's a good question, and I suppose for a lot of SMEs in particular, if they're looking at companies like Arda, looking at the HSE and think, look, God, if they're being hit by this and it's getting around their defences with all the resources they have at their disposal, what chance do we have? But there are, there are lots and lots of good measures they can take, and using artificial intelligence and what are called neural networks, it's a very good way of bolstering your defences. But that won't suit every SME, and there's a cost issue there. But sometimes, and other times, the networks they have just aren't suited to those kind of defences. But
well,
there are lots of other ways.
As clear, we'll come to those other ways in a sec, Paul, perhaps. But as clearly as you can you explain how artificial intelligence and those neural networks work? They basically identify perhaps irregular messages that don't normally come up or whatever, or that look a little bit suspicious using artificial intelligence.
Yeah, basically they're looking at patterns. It's almost like having a human look at things. So traditionally, over the last number of years, in a lot of the filtering that you have to as part of your defence will be looking at, say, keywords and looking at very set static patterns. But the problem is then if the attackers get stopped by those, they look, because they're human, they look for other ways around it. And if your defense is static, it has no way of stopping it. So a neural network or an artificial intelligence learns and it sees, oh, hold on, that thing over there, I've never seen that before. That's unusual. And it will react to it in that way. So that's why it's much more effective.
Are those software systems expensive for an SME?
It very much depends. I know it's the depends answer, but it does depend on your setup and your network and how complex it is to put in these defences. Sometimes they can be, but sometimes they're very affordable. But if you look at the cost to the HSE at the moment and you think, look, if I get an attack, this could be business ending, then it's all down to, what's the cost of that compared to the cost of actually putting in a defence that works.
You mentioned possible other solutions or protection mechanisms for SMEs, Paul?
Yeah, well, sure. I think at the very start you mentioned about the human element. So, the very first thing any business can do is make sure that its employees are trained up. And any business can do that. And the key thing I always feel anyway in any business is that has to be led from the top down. There has to be this cyber secure environment, this cyber secure ethos in the company. And if it isn't coming from right from the CEO through the CFO, CTO down, then there's a problem. It won't really stick. Employees won't take it seriously. And it's not just an IT problem. It's everyone's problem. Often the cybersecurity is left to the IT guys. Oh, it's an IT thing. It's not. Everyone has to have that mindset. And it's not complicated. It's not trusting, because all of these criminals, they're basing their attacks on the human instinct to trust. Yeah. I got this email, I'll check what that is. Don't you? It starts from the, well, are you sure it's safe kind of a mindset.
And obviously one of the key measures that companies can employ, regardless of their size, particularly if their data is anyway sensitive, is to have a backup system. Now, it is worrying that these latest attacks, perhaps it'll only be at large organisations firstly, but these latest attacks are not just freezing a company's processes and IT systems. If they had a backup system in place, that would help, but it's actually beginning to steal it now as well.
Yeah, and once they get entry into your system, you can never really they're criminals at the end of it. They're not going to be people who tell you the truth. So once they're in, they mightn't just lock your data. They can absolutely take your data, even though they tell you they haven't. They could, and what you see then is 6 months later on the dark web or on the black market, the data turns up for sale.
But at the very least, your advice would be
valuable.
to have a completely separate backup system.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, the key, if you think about what ransomware is, all they're doing is they're locking your data so you don't have access to it. So if you have that data somewhere else, that takes away the power from ransomware. So backups are absolutely essential tool and essential way of fighting back at ransomware.
Finally, Paul, apart from getting advice from companies like yourselves, Stryve Secure, would you advise companies to at least look at the possibility of having insurance against a cyber attack?
Oh no, absolutely, yeah. The problem a lot of companies may face though is that insurance, because ransomware is becoming so prevalent over the last number of years, insurance is becoming increasingly difficult to actually get, ironically. But if you can, absolutely, I would advise you getting it, because as you can see from these attacks, it can be business ending. And the very fact that insurance is becoming increasingly difficult to get means it is happening. And a lot of the time you just don't hear about it. Nobody wants to advertise that they've been the victim of a ransomware attack. So, you hear of the HSE because obviously you can't hide that. But there are lots of other companies falling victim to this that you just don't hear about.
Okay, Paul Delahunty, Chief Security Officer with StryveSecure.com based in Carlow. Thanks for joining us this morning.